Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today on the fourth and final episode or series of our webinar, our four-part series for Insight Technology and Solutions. Today, we're going to be talking about decarbonization through IDD, which is the Integrated Digital Delivery. All right. As you guys have probably become very familiar with myself, my name is Luke Wing, and today we have Shivani Soni, who is our head of impact and innovation here at Symetri, where we will overlook kind of a global approach to how we address sustainability. Without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and bring Shivani in and let her do her thing.
All right. Thanks for that, Luke. All right. Thank you all for, as Luke said, joining us for our last and fourth part of our series, right? Before we dive into today's discussion, we'd like to give a brief overview of Symetri and our mission so we can quickly get to the main and the final topic of our four-part series. So at Symetri, we are dedicated to driving sustainability in the industry, and we focus on decarbonization through our technology and expert consulting solution, helping customers to reduce their environmental footprint and meet their sustainability goals. Our goal is to make a positive impact by leveraging our solutions and expertise to contribute to a more sustainable future. And to be honest, it's not too hard to find the reasonings why. Why do we focus so heavily on sustainability? Well, climate change is causing widespread global negative impact. And with more frequent waves, heat waves, droughts, wildfires, storms, these extreme weather events affects our communities, ecosystems, and our food security. And they're leading to a biodiversity loss and forcing some people to relocate due to the rising sea levels. And for all of us working in the built environment, well, these challenges actually directly impact how we plan, design, and build. The urgency is clear. The action is needed now. And when we look within the construction industry, well, the construction industry plays a huge role in the global carbon emission and resource consumption. Sustainable construction is about minimizing this environmental impact. By using recycled materials, energy-efficient methods, and reducing waste, we can lower our emissions and create better outcomes for our projects. And it's also important to address that embodied carbon is about 11% of the global emission tied to materials and building processes. And with that, our commitment to sustainability is reflected through our actions. Through collaboration with our partners such as Autodesk and One-Click LCA, we are working towards to bring more meaningful change to the industry. Our key initiatives such as Naviate Zero, which is powered by One-Click LCA, it enables users to assess carbon impact early in the design process. It's taking a proactive and a data-driven approach to reduce emissions from the start. And the Co-Innovation Lab, the driving force behind today's presentation, is focused on transparency, collaboration, and innovation. These values are essential for effective decarbonization. Our goal is to provide a more sustainable solutions that truly make a difference within the built environment. But let's start with today's topic. Today, we're starting with Lifecycle Assessment, or LCA, as it's better known as, and some of the workflow strategies that can actually support it. LCA helps us to understand the environmental impact and our design choices, right from materials extraction through to construction and beyond. And while materials are definitely a big piece of the puzzle, it's really about looking at the whole life cycle of a building if we want to meet our sustainable goals. We'll break it down to some of the LCA processes step by step, and then you'll start to see that by focusing on some of the key stages, well, actually, we can start to make better decisions and drive more sustainable outcomes. So let's start with the basics, and then we're going to go from there, right? So you would have heard, if you joined some of our previous session where Luke had touched onto this, but if we start and we look into the life cycle stages of LCA, starting with A1 to A3, which focuses on material extraction, transportation, and production, these are areas where designers have the most influence. The materials is where we can specify and steer the project towards a more sustainable choices. And then when we move on to A4 and A5, these stages actually start to cover transport of materials to site and how they are assembled. At this point, the contractors can take lead. They're tracking the logistics and the assembly. And after that, stage B, it starts looking onto the ongoing maintenance of our buildings, or of the use of the building, In the early design stages, we often rely on industry averages or assumptions, as detailed data isn't always available yet. Rather than getting lost in the finer details, the key focus is to focus on the decisions that can have the most significant impact. So the LCA process is broken down into two main parts. You've got the inventory and then impact. And the standard approach used in the industry to figure out our building's environmental footprint. When we talk about inventory, we're talking really about just gathering data on material and processes being used on a project. This info typically comes from BIM models, material schedules, and specifications. So it matches what you actually planned in the design. Then when we move on to impact, this is where we can take that data and start to calculate the environmental efforts, mostly carbon emissions. We're using tools such as EPDs and LCA softwares. And it's also a common method across the industry to help us measure and compare the environmental impacts of different design choices. Together, these two parts give us a clear, consistent picture of a building's environmental performance, which is crucial for architects, engineers, and contractors when making these decisions. And often, LCA is actually done in two levels, right? You've got the building level and the material level. And both are key when it comes to achieving sustainability goals. But at the building level, we're looking at how the project stacks up against benchmarks. And this gives us a good idea of how the building's overall environmental performance is, whether there is value in reusing materials, or how can we balance embodied and operational carbon. But it's also a common approach in the sustainable design, and it helps with those bigger decisions. And then on the material level, we start to dig a little deeper. We look at the specific materials and assemblies that have high carbon. And this is where we start to consider alternatives that can lower the building's carbon footprint. And by working at both these levels, we make sure that we're covering everything from the big picture to the finer details, following the best practices across the industry. And one thing that we often hear, that we often find that it trips a lot of people up in the early stages, is that LCA is deciding between different calculation methods, like CML or Tracy. But at this early stage, it's important to remember that the main goal is to make quick and high-level comparisons with global warming potential as the baseline. Both CML and Tracy can calculate the GWP. And while they differ in how they measure things like ozone layer damage or the impact on soil and water, the key focus for early decisions should be on the global warming potential. But the good news is that the consistent data that we get from EPDs makes these comparisons much more easier. So when we think about the early design stages, well, actually it's quite common for architects and designers to just focus on the global warming potential average. This gives us a quick and a clear way to assess the carbon footprint of materials, allowing for easy comparisons and making sure that we're helping to make sure that we're on the right track towards sustainability. So the project progresses. And using global warming potential early on helps us to move quickly while still making sustainable choices. But then as the project moves into detailed design stage, we start looking beyond the GWP. At this stage, sustainability experts do more of the in-depth assessments. It's often using methods like Tracy, which is common in North America, or CML, which is typically used in Europe. These methods cover a wider range of environmental impacts, not just the global warming potential, but they also help to ensure that the design meets various environmental standards, including factors like how it affects air quality or human health. And as we move in the later stages of design and get closer to construction, well, the focus then shifts to fine-tuning the material choices and making sure that we're on track to meet sustainable certifications. Certifications like LEED for North America or BREEAM for Europe. And they typically involve detailed assessments and documentation. At this point, it's all about teamwork. Architects, designers, and sustainability experts working closely together. The goal is to balance the look and the functionality of a building with sustainability objects. And it's ensuring that the project not only meets the certification standards, but it also sets an example for responsible, forward-thinking design. The decisions that we make early on in the projects really have an impact on the overall sustainability of a project. By thinking about the life cycle of sustainability right from the offset, we can start to reduce the building's carbon footprint and make it more cost-effective over time. What we decide now will affect the building's emission throughout the life cycle. So by integrating sustainability into the design process early, we're actually ensuring that our projects are better for the environment and more efficient in the long run. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Luke, who will start to share some insight on some workflow strategies that you can take from.
Awesome. Thank you, Shivani. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and explore some of those practical workflows Shivani was just mentioning and how they really support an integrated digital delivery and really are going to help you guys get to your decarbonization efforts. I think this is kind of what we've all been waiting for. So let's go ahead and just dive into it. Okay. Well, I guess before diving into any project or the strategy for you guys, we believe the most important step is discovery. This is really a process where we encourage every organization we kind of work with to go through. It's really about understanding where you currently stand in terms of sustainability, decarbonization, and it's self-awareness, right? We all need to be self-aware. So during this stage, self-awareness is key. It's really about having that clear picture for what your current strategies and your goals are. So we often start by asking questions like, hey, what is your guys' vision? When it comes to sustainability, what do you want to do, right? What are your goals? How are you currently approaching your environmental strategies? What collaboration for what does it look like when we collaborate for sustainability, within your team or with internal stakeholders? Or even most importantly, what are your goals for carbon emissions and sustainability? Is there demand? Who's driving this? And how do you align with these initiatives and targets? So we have to really take a good look in the mirror, like Michael Jackson, a man in the mirror or woman in the mirror. But benefits of self-awareness, right? We have to address these questions. The aim is really not just to gather random data. It does no good, right? But it's really to help you see the big picture and ensure that every effort or decision we make or initiative we go with, whether it's decarbonization, net zero, or just BIM standards, it needs to be aligned with your long-term vision of your organization, right? So let's break this down. Vision is going to give you direction. It's the guiding light for your sustainability efforts, right? Your strategy is going to outline the approach and how you're going to get to that vision. Your goals and objectives are going to keep your efforts really focused and measurable, right? You need to have measurable goals. I think we've all heard of SMART goals. And then finally, how are you going to do this? You have to measure it. So often through tools like LCA, like one-click LCA or any of the other LCA tools you come across, they ensure that you're tracking this progress really in a meaningful way and doing impact, right? So what does this all come down to? It's successful implementation, right? The discovery process helps lay a solid foundation for your successful implementation, right? It ensures that your sustainability journey is not only isolated efforts, but it's really a coherent and a scalable strategy, most importantly, right? With clear goals that align with the broader organizational objectives. And it's not just sitting on a desk collecting dust. It's actually going to be utilized. All right. So I'm sure you guys all recognize this cycle of iterations and how the design process works, right? You guys work on a model, you do all kinds of, tweaking and modeling, and then you have to send it off to be analyzed. By the time that team gets it, they digest it, get you some information back. I think that project's moved on by 2 weeks, and some of that data you get back is no longer relevant. So instead, we want to go ahead and erase that iteration phase. You want to be able to make these design decisions as you go. So that's the whole point here, is be informed using data, the I in BIM, to make better decisions on the go. Let's move into the 21st century and let's start leveraging our data and go away from these old school hand drafting kind of mentalities. Next one, please. Thank you. All right. So here is my personal favorite. I just kind of biased, but let's just talk about the real value of what we've been talking about. I think you've heard this term throughout the entire webinar. It's called the PACI, or the Predictive Assembly Carbon Index, right? So basically, let's just go over how this saves time while making sustainability accessible for your team, right? So as you can see on the slide, the PACI is really designed to streamline daily carbon calculations within your Revit project template, right? So normally, when it comes to understanding these environmental impacts of your design, there's a lot of manual, time-consuming work involved, especially in the early stages when there's a lot of unknowns, right? Your EPDs are very accurate most of the time, so you're looking for data. How accurate is this data? Is it too much? So there's a lot of question marks, right? Well, when you're mapping materials, you're gathering that information. You're mapping materials to EPDs, and you're trying to calculate the global warming potential. And just to start on every single project, that could probably take up to a week at least, right? So with the PACI, we really try to take all the complexity of that process and the unknown and the gray area out of your hands, So as this animation will show, we do all the heavy lifting for you in your PACI. We're going to automatically benchmark your materials, your assemblies. We're going to pull from the industry-leading database like One-Click LCA, because we have a strategic partnership with them. And we're going to share that all that relevant, sustainable data, like your GWP values, is ready to go within your Revit model, in your template, right? So this means no more manual mapping or struggling to find the right EPD for each material, vetting through specifications. It's all ready to go in your model, right? It's all pre-mapped, pre-calculated, and you don't have to spend hours of initial setup for every project, right? So the benefit here is twofold. First, your designs get immediate insights into carbon footprint on their projects without any extra tools or LCA knowledge. That's fantastic. Baseline entry-level workflow, right? Second, it's going to allow you to really focus on what really matters in your design, right? It's your design work. You guys are designers. You're not LCA specialists. Most of you aren't, right? So you're going to design, and you'll be able to see those impacts and make, informed decisions, right? So it's ensuring that sustainability is woven into your process from day one. I think we've all said this. It needs to be, as daily work. Some needs to be how we work on the daily. It needs to be integrated into our workflow. And this is a way to truly integrate sustainability into everything you do, whether there's fee or not for the project, right? And because it's integrated into your Revit environment, you don't have to learn new software or a new system. And as soon as you select a wall or a floor type, the PACI really can isolate that assembly. It runs the analysis, and it captures all the materials in your model. And it's going to calculate those GWP values in a predefined area. And it's going to give your square footage or your cubic meters, wherever you're at, right? And from there, it's going to map everything to the correct EPDs, exports all the correct data to the file. So when you start a new project, those assemblies and their carbon metrics, they're all with you. You can always reuse them. And it's automatically populating schedules and carbon tools, right? So you're no longer bogged down with time-consuming setup work. Instead, you're empowered with accurate, sustainable data from the start, and it's allowing you to focus on refining designs, knowing what the environmental impact is being handled really kind of behind the scenes, right? So what's going on here? We're taking these, everyone says, oh, we use such different materials in every project. True, you may. However, there is 120, 200 materials in your project you use on every single project. Chipboard, steel, these things that we can start baselining and knowing as soon as you start drawing, we understand what the impact is. Now, granted, you want to do facade analysis. Well, let's baseline your first three, and then we can do progressive designs where we look at that same buildup just with a different, maybe it's thin brick versus thick brick, or maybe it's a Corten rain screen. But you can understand the impacts of your carbon as well as your design decisions and understand, start getting a clear picture of that. And then we really start getting cool and adding cost into this mix, but that'll be a little bit later. But the PACI really transformed the way you approach sustainability. It's going to make it faster, simpler, more effective without adding any extra steps to your workflow. And every project, whether you're bidding or you're going for that, that RFP, or you're just talking to the client, you can be like, hey, if you want this brick facade, we're expecting that's going to be a huge impact on our global warming potential, if carbon's a goal. So it just allows you to open those avenues and start that conversation earlier. As soon as you have a mass or a shape of a building, you can start understanding how your assemblies are going to perform on that project. All right, enough about the PACI. Like I said, I'm biased. I love it. I could spend all day here. However, what's the point of that? I know you guys maybe not see the end goal here, right? So you're like, oh, great, I have all my assemblies in there, but that's kind of static, right? Absolutely, it is static. And that's not what that's designed. It's not designed for that evolution, right? But you'll couple this on with the predictive LCA. And this is really where we're going to start optimizing these material impacts throughout that design phase, right? So now that your initial mapping is done, and maybe you had to map a handful of materials instead of hundreds because the new ones on this project that are unique, right? What this allows you to do is we're skipping that first couple weeks of initial mapping and EPD searching and spec specification, but we're getting instant impacts. So with the PLCA, basically, we're looking at that material level. We're understanding that animation, please. Thank you. That this is, we're going to investigate this wall assembly and say, that insulation layer is our biggest violator. It's in 4 different wall types. What are we going to do about it? Well, with the PACI and the PLCA, you'll be able to control, navigate, and quickly replace these, right? So now you're just swapping out material level. You're not looking at a building scope, and it's a lot less daunting, and you can get more done. If you don't change your specification, nothing is getting into the project. So if you can't focus in on a material and actually change something, the LCA is for nothing. So that's really what the PLCA is all about. It takes that deeper dive into evaluating and optimizing those really choices that we refine in our designs. And it's really about taking your initial insights from the PACI, utilizing that data as a head start, and really conducting that more detailed strategic assessment so you can identify within those key impacts, right? So it's really about exploring, getting better materials, replacing those materials, and it's just a more focused workflow, right? It's understanding impacts. It's a high-level LCA, and it's about starting aligning and tracking these changes so we can actually get something done. So the predictive LCA processes leverages tools like Navigate Zero or One-Click LCA, but it really is to provide that deeper insight, allowing for the strategic decisions that refine material choices and help you optimize your sustainability goals throughout the design, right? All right. So next on our list, we're going to then graduate into like the building LCA. This is probably what you guys are most familiar with and what people are trying to do, even in early stages, right? But it's about understanding how this all fits together. This is the more detailed analysis. And what we have to understand is that those first 2 workflows we're talking about, those are like design models. Basis of design models, right? We're exploring, we're using that data to make decisions where they aren't accurate. We're not going to report those, right? Those are for us to understand. But we often work with a team or an accredited professional or a contractor to get these certified and reported, right? And that's when you need to leverage a tool like One-Click LCA. So using the data that we built on, because we built everything off of One-Click LCA, your data is going to transfer into One-Click LCA, so you have 0 data loss. And that's going to allow you to work with your stakeholders, your accredited professionals, or even with your internal sustainability team, right? So by leveraging those insights we gained from the LCA, we now move on to that final, more comprehensive phase where it's like the full building LCA and it's coupled with One-Click. And we're talking about, kind of developing an as-built here, right? And we're looking at from cradle to grave. And this comprehensive approach really considers everything from material extraction, manufacturing, construction, site operations, right? The maintenance of this building. And then what happens to these pieces when we demolish them, or we remove them and reuse them, right? And so it helps you start understanding those plans and guidance so you can start even making post-life documents, right? And so using one-click LCA, you're really able to perform those comprehensive evaluations at this level when you need to, right? There's no early in the design, this is too much information and it's going to overload your team and you're going to spin your wheels and you won't get anything done. So it's really important to understand when and how each of these come into play and when you should leverage them, right? So value and impact for you guys, right? This is a holistic environmental assessment. This is the full bang, right? Full building LCA provides the complete picture of your building's impact, and it's going to enable stakeholders to interact, work together, and really gives them a full picture to make decisions on the overall footprint, right? And this is probably coming in later in the design stages, like when you have specs that are driving these things, right? Now, it's also going to help with collaboration and alignment. This phase promotes collaboration through all the parties, from the owner to the people of the community that you're building in, right? And so that's what's really important. It gets you out there. You look, not to say you look like you're caring, you do care, but it shows people you're caring. You're putting your money where your mouth is. A lot of people do the talking. Not very many people want to put the money up, right? Oh, we do sustainability. We love sustainability. Oh, nice. Oh, one click costs how much? Never mind. So guys, it's time to really start buckling down and doing this, right? So in essence, the full building LCA is really supported by tools like Navigate Zero, our PACI, and one-click LCA because it's that gradual process and it builds up. Because the issue we're trying to solve here, and next slide, please, is how really these solutions fit into the project stages, right? At conceptual and schematic design versus design development, first when you're in construction or operations, or even when you're transitioning to the owner, right? So it's really important to understand that the PACI is really great and a good player for the early design stages when you're kind of understanding the massing versus your typicals, and you may be adding some others to that. But then in order to refine that analysis and add those unique elements, you'll need something to be able to benchmark an LCA. So you will need a tool, right? And Navigate Zero is the simple, easy option. It integrates into Revit and it's made for the designer. And it's really meant to work along with that PACI and the assemblies in there and be able to create those assemblies, right? And then if you need to do the accreditation aspect, then all that data transfers into one click. If you don't need to go into that aspect, you can still get a validated GWP product from Navigate Zero or even the PACI that satisfies most of these reporting credentials, because at the end of the day, they want you just to run one. Please run an LCA and give me a bit baseline. That's one point. So leads probably a lot less specific or thorough in their wording than you guys across the pond with Bream. But the point is that slow motion's better than no motion. You got to just do it. And we know that the earlier you do it in a project, the cost of changing these things is a lot less, right? Once people get their mindset, changing that mind is tough. And there's a budget that's tied to it, right? So your opportunity of influence really drops. And oftentimes these things that we're trying to put into projects get value engineered out. Well, if we're considering these facts from day one, the less likely they are going to be value engineered out of the project, which oftentimes people see sustainability. It's a niche thing. It's a check mark, or maybe like, oh, it's expensive. But that's where we have to show them it's valuable and how it's going to save them money in the long run. Sustainability can be profitable. We have to show the clients how that's work. All right. And so I'll go ahead and show you just this kind of one last image on showing the addressing the LCA at those different stages. So we saw it through the project timeline. And what this is really just showing that this pyramid is really that layered approach to the LCA. It's going to show how all these different roles, these different tools, they all contribute to the project at different stages as we work together, right? So at the foundation, we have that PACI solution, right? Everybody can use it. Anybody who gets in Revit can draw a wall and reference a schedule. Oh, look, there's my GWP. It's for everybody, right? It helps evaluate the carbon footprint early on in the process and providing insights and helping you, guide your team with sustainability decisions where, a lot of tools use these really generic data sets, but the PSI is going to be tailored data set to your specifications. So it's going to give you a more accurate snapshot into your project, right? And when you move up to tier 2, that's when your specialized teams within the LCA, that maybe know some LCA, have some knowledge in the in-depth how to use it, right? They're going to build upon that data you're generated, and they're going to basically build out your organizational profile from the PACI. They're going to map EPDs to optimize material choices. They're going to make swaps, duplicate, rename, and you're going to expand your library and your material list, right? And you can start connecting it to your red list materials and all this other stuff. So we really start working in a connected workflow, considering all these metrics when we're making decisions, right? And at the top of the pyramid, you see builders and contractors. They use this refined data to really push the LCA process across the finish line, right? They're doing the as-built, they're doing the procuring. Our spec has to say you can purchase within these 3 materials that meet this guidance. And oftentimes carbon's not one of their biggest things they're looking at. They're looking at cost. Is it available? Can I get it? And so unless we put that language in there, they don't care, unfortunately. But they're the ones pushing this across the stage. They're the ones that are using the one-click LCA probably the most, alongside your accredited professionals. They're going to guide this whole thing. They're going to ensure alignment with your sustainability goals during construction and throughout the building lifecycle and the design phase. You guys have room to explore, make mistakes, understand. It doesn't have to be perfect. You have these people supporting you to really make sure that your building is going to be accurately represented and performing as best as possible, right? So whether you're starting with the PACI in the early stages and the workflow progresses through the specialized teams like Navigate Zero, and ensure it remains streamlined and you're aligned to those goals. And at the different project stages, the IDD, really the integrated digital delivery, the glue, that ensures the solutions like the PACI, or if you use Navigate Zero or one-click LCA or all of them together, that they're integrated seamlessly into your BIM workflows. Because at the end of the day, I know it sucks to say this, we still have to produce 2D documents. So the end of the day, that's our goal. I know the 3D models are amazing. I love it. I wish maybe one day we can use those as submittals, but right now 2D documents are our end goal, and we can't interrupt BIM workflows because we have to get those buildings out so we can get projects in, and we are a business. I get it, right? But we can do business better, right? We saw a slide earlier. We can do good and still make money and be profitable, right? So this integration really is hoping to ensure consistent, optimized workflows, really increasing that likelihood that it's going to be adopted, it's going to be utilized, understood, and it's going to help you guys get to your decarbonization goals, right? If you never start tracking or looking at it, you'll never know where you are. So it comes back to looking at the man or woman in the mirror and doing that self-awareness. Where are we? What are our goals? Are we really going to do this? Are we investing this or not? And so that's what the conversation we have to have. And when we do this, we make sure that your investment is worth it. So last one, we kind of rattling on here, but our job as designers, right, is to use these LCA tools to make better decisions early on, like I've been harping on, right? It's going to refine your designs to lower your GWP. Your sustainability consultant is going to collect all this as-built data and understand those real-world impacts to the project. While LCA might seem, complex, our role is really to refine specifications. That's all you really have to do, right? To ensure contractors procure materials with lower GWPs. And people have been doing this for years. They use rules of thumb or Excel sheets, and they kind of oh, we can do this. But now we have a way to validate, prove it, showcase this, visualize it. And this collaborative approach between designers, consultants, and contractors is going to transition us from the design intent to the as-built models, just how we do in BIM, right? We have an as-built or design model and a basis of design, and then an as-built. And it's going to really help us get this unified workflow eventually where that model lives on and it continues through the stages, right? So, like I said earlier, most often as designers, our LCA models are exploratory. We're learning from them. Consultants will create that as-built LCA based on procured materials. And our biggest influence as a designer in using LCA is refining your specifications. It's boring. It's not pretty, but specifications are going to drive your project. If your language isn't tight, they're purchasing cheap. I promise. I've been on the contracting side. All right. So if you want to make a change a spec. So in the pre-design stage, what are some things you can do? What stage can you get involved, right? Well, you're aligning strategic objectives. You're aligning with client business goals and cases. You can focus on your carbon footprint at a high level. Like, hey, is this a goal of ours? What do we want to be at? What's the baseline? And at what stage involves that? Are you getting involved in? Is it an initial brief? Are you looking at the budget? And these are topics you want to bring up in those early stages, right? In design stage, you want to do initial concept designs, massing, structure, understand big impacts. And that's where the PACI comes in. You can start applying those typical assemblies to these masses and structures and saying, oh, wow, it's a lot of brick. Maybe we should look at thin face brick. Cool. And you can start making those design decisions from day one, so you're not getting slapped in the face with budget surprises, right? In the construction phase, they're using all this data because we put them so far ahead. Our specs are nice and tight. The contractors just doing it. And it's these EPDs are in one-click LCA because we specified that product based with our language. We can't specify a product, but we can get really creative with our language, right? And even to how these materials and elements live on through the handover phase. Hey, when you repurchase a new air handler for this building, it needs to reach this efficiency level and produce at this, so the rest of the building doesn't go out of whack. So many times I've seen underground air systems designed. The user goes in and messes with it, and the system becomes unbalanced. What can you do, right? But there's a lot of designers that are putting rules in place about how these buildings are utilized if they want to maintain performance, right? All righty. And so I think that will lead us into this kind of tying this all together, right? We're going to be integrating BIM and LCA workflows to improve both efficiency and sustainability through 4 key phases, right? We're looking at motivating people. We're looking at the exploration phase. We're looking at the integration phase and the evaluation phase, right? And so what do these mean? Well, BIM and LCA, we want to establish that framework, define those decision-making processes. We're going to outline sustainability requirements, and we're going to embed it into everyday workflows, right? But in the exploration phase, we're going to look at tools. We're going to understand, is it Revit, Navigate Zero, one-click? Are they all of them together? Is it one of them? Conduct these case studies. Show your firm's value, how much you know. Flex your stuff, guys. That's what that's for, right? And when we set up our project goals and conduct these lifecycle inventories, we want to make sure that it's integrated into our project so users aren't thinking about it. It's how we work. Carbon is what we do, right? In the evaluation phase, we have to be honest with ourselves. No more fluffing our LCA models, guys. I've seen people go in there and there's like, oh, green cloud, green cloud, green cloud. Guys, that's not how it's purchased. That's not how it works. We have to be real with ourselves. This evaluation phase. We have to assess those environmental impacts, compare results, be honest, define the best proposal, and reduce the carbon footprint from day one. Let's go into this RFI or RFP with understanding of what our footprint is, right? And this will help us achieve both immediate and our long-term goals. All right, enough of me rambling, and we'll go ahead and just get into the case studies now. All right. So in these case studies, I think you guys have all been waiting for. In our first session, you heard from wonderful Brandon Beatrice, right, at Bernheimer Architecture. And through this process, we became pretty good friends. He's a great person. And it was really interesting to see how he took our workflow and evolved it. So I'm just going to give you a little insight into some of the challenges, the solutions, and maybe some of the outcomes. Now, the outcomes here, we're not, is constantly evolving and there's numbers involved, but this is more like high level impact, right? The next one gets into kind of some numbers. So we're going to take a look just really how we worked with Bernheimer Architecture to address these sustainability challenges. So first we identified their key challenges. They needed a way to understand office standards and be able to compare those to baselines for future certifications like the ILFI zero carbon certification, right? A major hurdle was being able to communicate the carbon impact of their design choices at this early stage, like concept schematic design, right? So it's not only to architects, to clients and engineers, but there are other stakeholders that were involved in the project, even the community, right? So additionally, they wanted a solution that was simple, and deployable to their team for everybody. A method with a lower barrier to entry that could really measure the carbon impact accurately of their design directly within their Revit model, not overwhelming the rest of the staff. So our solution was to address these challenges. We wanted to partner with them, right? We with them to develop a custom solution for what they needed. We created what's called the Predictive Assembly Carbon Index, as you guys heard all about the PACI, which is essentially a catalog of their assemblies with their walls, floors, roofs, and their embodied carbon data for all those assemblies can be pulled directly into their designs. So when we integrated all these assemblies into their projects, it makes it easier for them to access without any additional work. And so finally, we set up some schedules in their model, and Brandon took this and evolved it and made 3D views that display the impacts. And within their Revit model, they can now automatically highlight assemblies with the highest embodied carbon values. And again, requiring no extra work from their design team. So as a result, Bernheimer Architecture has really achieved several important outcomes. They now have a platform of baseline embodied carbon assemblies as their staff can implement easily without any special knowledge or additional training. That's gold, right? No one has to be trained on it. It's just there. We provide a collection of the PACI data sets that can be modified and reused for unique conditions in the future projects. And that's offering the flexibility that he was looking for. So by simplifying the process, the firm saved significant amount of time and resources for both management and specialists. And instead of spending time evaluating assemblies in LCA software or materials, they can now focus on communicating and strategizing and ways to reduce carbon in other areas. So lastly, this solution is added high value to their projects and their proposals, and it really helps them stand out to their competition and their clients. So thank you again, Brandon. This was a wonderful, wonderful project. I really enjoyed working with you and your team. And I love to see how you've evolved the PACI and made it even better than what I could have ever imagined. So big shout out to you, Brandon, if you're still here. Now, this one's a fun one. This one is a little bit different. Not saying Brandon's wasn't fun, but this is just a different approach, right? You're learning challenging stuff every day. This one was from Mark, and Mark was with CPAC, right? And CPAC Modular really approaches their decarbonization efforts differently. They know this is in. They had to investment. They're ready to go, right? So CPAC Modular faced two main challenges here. First, they needed a way to validate their GWP reductions. They knew they had good materials and good selections, and specifically really in modular construction methods, comparing those against standard construction approaches, right? So this required a more precise and scalable approach, right? So second, they needed an adoptable and scalable process to measure and validate those carbon impacts through the various construction phases and really enabling accurate comparison over the entire life cycle of the project. So the solution was, again, taking something that we've done and tailoring that approach to them. So we created a modified kind of PACI workflow, but it's designed for the design build, right? And it's really leveraging one-click LCA customized to fit the modular needs. So we integrated Predictive Modular Carbon Index, or just another fun acronym I just made up, PMCI, right? To ensure that enhanced precision and scalability when you're measuring carbon impacts. So we implemented this flexible system that could adapt to the LCA process to fit modular workflows, improving both accuracy and efficiency. And these results, guys, are mind-blowing, right? We were able to validate and prove that in both terms of carbon reduction and process improvement, right? So CPAC Modular saw 74% reduction in carbon emissions from their structural assemblies compared to that of traditional construction. If that is not a selling point, I don't know what is. 74%, it's huge. There was also a 51% reduction in emissions from architectural materials by cutting the GWP down from 83,000 kilograms of CO2e down to 4,090 kilograms of CO2e. That's more than half of their emissions in architectural fit-out materials eliminated. Amazing, right? Now, what they did with foundations, because they lightened up everything and everything's modular, they were able to reduce foundational concrete, which is one of our biggest impactors in projects, by 83%. They're lowering emissions by 264,000 kilograms of CO2e down to 44,000 kilograms of CO2e. That's impressive. That is almost, that's It's 83%, right? That's crazy. And additionally, this system saved their team 1 to 2 weeks of LCA baseline mapping for every project, because now they know what their modules are. And anytime they go for an RFP, they don't have to remap this stuff. They know the weight of that steel, where it comes from, because they control their entire procurement and their the supply chain, correct? So that's all good stuff. That sounds great, good for those. But you guys want to hear some feel goods, some stuff that maybe clients can relate to. When you do the math on this, these reductions equated to removing over 1,200 cars from the road each year, and not the little cars, big cars, right? And it's equivalent to planting 191 trees, right? So just by doing this, they're reforesting. It feels like they're removing cars from the road. And those are things clients can kind of connect with and see. When they understand kilograms of CO2, it's kind of like this imaginary mass that's floating around. And they can't quite connect with that. But trees, they can. All right. So this was a fantastic project. I really had fun. Mark challenged me. He he looked at his numbers and he knew it off the back of his hand. He knew this project intimately. And so that's what made this easy. When I was looking at a linear foot of steel, he knew exactly how much that steel weighed, and it made this process tenfold. So now we have an organizational profile set up, and it's going to be usable over and over and over and over again. So that initial investment has probably paid itself off already. But as we conclude our IDD, or the integrated digital delivery, I want you to understand it goes beyond tool use. It's not about tools. We're focusing on long-term effectiveness through these workflows, right? And it's about how you integrate these tools and workflows and your culture of your office all together. So this approach is not really delivering just immediate benefits, but it also is laying groundwork for lasting impact, right? It's embedding these strategies as sustainability becomes more accessible for everybody. And it's as a part of our practice. And we're going to really start contributing meaningfully to these efforts across the globe.
All right, sweet. Thank you for that, Luke. What was kind of great about that is actually, what Luke was kind of talking about there was a graduation journey, right? If we want to make sustainability a reality, well, actually, we need to break it down a little digestible bite size, and we got to make our LCA softwares and our solutions make them work for us, right? Find those sort of workflows and actually integrate it in. And then as we're evolving that design project to find the best sort of approach and make sure that we can make those software tools to kind of work for us. If you've been intrigued by any of the insights that we've shared throughout this 4-part series, and you want to learn more about how we're supporting the industry on its decarbonization journey, just scan the QR code on the screen and it will take you into more details on how we are driving these efforts and how you can actually get involved as well. So on that, thank you to everyone. Feel free to contact us if you want to find out more. And yeah.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.